Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's good to be here.
So today, we're really stripping everything away, all the noise of modern life.
We are.
And we're trying to tackle what is maybe the ultimate question, the definition of the divine, and how that stacks up against, the human condition.
It's a huge topic. We're looking at what you could call a code of the spirit.
Exactly. A code that's in this stark, often really uncomfortable contrast to the code of the world.
Right. This isn't just about history. It's more like a deep dive into the psychology of belief itself.
Yes, and the nature of an all-seeing God and these radical, almost counterintuitive ethics that directly challenge a materialistic or even an atheistic worldview.
It's a worldview that demands, really, a total reconstruction of the human heart. We've got a whole collection of writings here. Psalms, Proverbs, the accounts of Jesus from Matthew, Luke, John.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, right?
Sure.
To try and uncover the internal logic of this whole system.
A system where righteousness isn't just a rule book.
No, it's not about looking good on the outside. It's describing a total transformation.
Yeah.
It challenges everything we think we know about power, about enemies,
Yeah.
even what we do in the privacy of our own minds.
And that's the key, isn't it? This idea that there's really no such thing as private.
Which is, that's a terrifying concept for the modern mind. We love our privacy.
You do.
But, before we really jump into the deep end of that particular pool, I just have a quick thing to ask.
Go for it.
We're really trying to grow this community of thinkers. So if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
It really does help.
It makes a huge difference getting this content out there. So, okay,
Oh.
back to it. This concept of privacy,
Oh.
or the complete lack of it.
Exactly. Let's start there.
Right. So we're looking at Psalm 139, some of the Have Faith excerpts. The text describes an all-seeing eye.
Mm.
And when we think of that today, we think of like a dystopian surveillance state, cameras on every corner.
Yeah.
Big Brother, yeah. But this is framed very differently. It's intensely personal, not bureaucratic at all. The writer literally says, "Oh Lord, you have searched me and you know me."
It's not just observation, it's knowledge. It's knowledge. And that phrase, you hem me in behind and before, it sounds almost claustrophobic.
It can, yeah. But the text sort of balances that with a feeling of security. It says, "You perceive my thoughts from afar." And just think about what that implies.
That before a word is even on my tongue, the intent is already known.
Completely known. It just dissolves that barrier between your inner self and the outer world.
And then it says, darkness is as light to you. So there's no hiding, not in the depths, not anywhere. Solitude in this worldview is an illusion. You're never, ever actually alone.
Precisely. And that creates this real tension. On one hand, the text talks about being knit together in the womb. It's intimate, it's creative.
Right. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. It's a huge affirmation of value. You're not just an accident.
But then the other side of that coin, to be that known, to have every dark thought, every selfish motive just exposed. It's fearful, like the text itself admits.
Yeah.
This knowledge is too wonderful, too lofty.
And this is where we see that first big divide, that binary between those who find comfort in this total transparency and those who are in rebellion.
Yeah, the text gets really sharp here. It starts talking about bloodthirsty men and people who misuse God's name. It asks, "Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord?"
That is not a live and let live philosophy.
Not at all.
No. The source presents a reality where you're either aligning with this all-seeing force or you're resisting it. And that resistance isn't framed as just an intellectual disagreement.
No, it says they have evil intent.
Mm.
It frames the rejection of God not as a logical hurdle, but as a moral choice.
Which is a perfect segue into how this worldview just flips everything else upside down.
Right. Because if you accept that you're being seen by this divine standard, your whole definition of success has to change. You can't just play by the rules of the world anymore.
Not at all. And that's where we get the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew and the Sermon on the Plain in Luke. I call it the great inversion of power.
The famous "blessed are" section. But when you really listen to the words, they are so counterintuitive.
They are?
The world's code says, "Blessed are the rich, the powerful, the people who get what they want." This text says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek."
It's a complete redefinition of who gets to inherit reality. And then there's the warning that often gets skipped over. In Luke, it says, "Woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort."
That is a jarring line. "And woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry."
Yeah.
It's like it's saying present-day comfort is actually a bad thing. a liability.
It suggests it's an anesthetic. It numbs you to spiritual reality. If you're
Yeah.
full and comfortable now, you're not hungry for anything deeper. You just stagnate.
And there's that salt and light metaphor in there, too. You're the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
But, and this is the kick, if the salt loses its saltiness, it's worthless.
Thrown out and trampled. The whole point there is about being distinct. If you claim to be part of this code of the spirit, but you look and act and react just like everyone else, you're useless. You've lost your purpose.
So distinctiveness is the currency. And what's the most distinct, the most salty quality?
Yeah,
It seems to be how you treat your enemies.
without a doubt. This is probably the most radical ethical demand in any text anywhere. Love your enemies, not just put up with them.
Not ignore them, love them. And the examples are hard to swallow. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, you're supposed to turn the other one.
If they sue you for your shirt, give them your coat too. If a soldier forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 with him.
It sounds like a recipe for being exploited. It sounds like being a doormat.
Yeah.
Why? What's the logic there?
It feels like weakness from a worldly perspective, but in this worldview, it's actually the ultimate power move.
How so?
Well, the text asks, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Even people operating on the worldly code do that. It's just a transaction. Basic economics.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Exactly. But the text says to be perfect like the Father, who sends rain on the good and the evil alike. So by loving your enemy, you're mimicking the nature of God. You're breaking the cycle.
You're refusing to react on their terms.
Precisely. Turning the other cheek is saying, your violence doesn't control me. My response isn't dictated by your action. You're acting from a place of grace, not a place of fear.
That's a huge shift in the locus of control, from the outside to the inside, which actually is a perfect bridge to the next big theme, internalizing the law.
Mm-hmm. It's not enough to just do the right things. You have to be the right way on the inside.
And the standard is set with that phrase, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees.
And we have to remember the Pharisees were the pros, the Olympic athletes of rule-keeping. But the text implies it was all external performance.
Right. So the text takes these old laws like do not murder and just cranks them up to an impossible level. It
Yeah.
says if you're even angry with your brother or call him a fool, you're in danger of hellfire.
It equates contempt with murder, which is a profound psychological insight, really. It traces the action back to its root.
You're saying murder doesn't just happen out of nowhere.
It happens after you've already dehumanized someone in your mind. The text argues that the moment you harbor contempt, you've already committed murder in your heart. The physical act is just a technicality.
And it does the same thing with lust. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery. It's literally policing your imagination.
It's ruthless about the internal world because that's where the real you lives. And then you get these really violent metaphors to drive the point home.
Oh, yeah. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out.
Yeah.
If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off.
Whoa.
Okay, hold on. Is that advocating self-harm?
No, it's hyperbole. But it's hyperbole to make a very serious point about what you value. It's saying that your spiritual integrity is worth more than your physical body parts.
So it's better to enter life maimed than to have a whole body and be destroyed.
It's basically saying do whatever it takes to get rid of the things that corrupt your heart. Be that radical about it.
And you can't fake it, which is where the hypocrisy part comes in. The image of the guy with a giant plank of wood in his own eye trying to pick a tiny speck of sawdust out of his friend's eye.
It's almost a cartoon, but it cuts so deep. It's a warning against using judgment to make yourself feel superior.
So the code of the world judges others to elevate the self.
Whereas the code of the spirit says you have to judge yourself first. Deal with your own massive plank before you even think about helping someone with their speck.
So we have this impossibly high standard. Total transparency, loving your enemies, pure thoughts. I mean, how is anyone supposed to actually do this? It sounds like a complete setup for failure.
And that is the exact question a man named Nicodemus asks. We see it in John's account.
Right. Nicodemus, he's a ruler, a top religious leader. And he comes to Jesus at night.
At night, yeah, which is symbolic. He's in the dark, literally and figuratively. And he admits, we know you're a teacher from God.
And Jesus just hits him with this bombshell concept that seems to come out of left field. You must be born again.
Nicodemus is completely baffled. He takes it literally, biologically. How can I go back into my mother's womb?
Which is a fair question, I guess.
It is, but the text makes a distinction. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. It's talking about two different kinds of reality.
So you can't just learn this stuff. You can't just read a book and decide to be better. It's saying you have to be, what, rebooted.
Rebooted is a great way to put it, or like you need a whole new operating system. The argument is that the flesh, our default human condition, just can't run the spiritual code. The hardware is incompatible. You need a metaphysical upgrade.
And this brings us right back to that theme of God versus the rejection of God. The text actually gives a reason why people reject this light, this reboot.
This is maybe the most provocative part of the whole source. It doesn't say people reject it for a lack of evidence or because the logic is flawed.
No. It says light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil.
That is a searing indictment. It's framing skepticism not as an intellectual position, but as a moral one, a cover-up.
It's arguing that the rejection of this divine order
Right.
is a defense mechanism.
Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed.
It all comes back to the all-seeing eye. If I admit the light exists, then I have to admit I'm seen. My flaws are seen. But if I stay in the dark, I can pretend I'm hidden. I can control my own story.
Exactly. And the attitude of someone who is willing to step into the light is perfectly summed up by John the Baptist later in the text.
What does he say?
He must become greater. I must become less.
Wow. That's the ultimate humility. It's the absolute opposite of the human ego, which is always screaming, I must become greater.
It's an abdication of the throne of your own life to make room for the divine.
So, okay, we have all these high-level concepts. Metaphysics, being born again, light and darkness. But the sources also get very practical about the consequences, right? Especially in Proverbs and at the end of the sermons.
They do. In Proverbs, you get this personification of two different paths. There's Lady Wisdom, who offers long life, riches, and honor. She's called a tree of life.
And her opposite is the wayward woman, or the adulterous woman.
Right, who is really a metaphor for folly, for sin. Her words are seductive, she promises immediate pleasure, but her house leads down to death. The text says, none who go to her return. It implies this path has a point of no return.
And Jesus ends his big sermon with a very similar practical image. The two builders.
It's the final warning, the summary argument. He says everyone hears these words. The difference isn't in the hearing. The intellectual part is irrelevant.
The difference is in the doing.
That's it. The wise man builds his house on the rock. The foolish man builds his on the sand.
And the storm comes for both houses. I think that's a key detail people miss.
It's a crucial point. Following this code doesn't promise you a storm-free life. You don't get a pass on crisis or suffering.
No. The rain falls on both lives.
It promises a foundation that stands when the crisis hits. The house on the sand, the life built on appearances, on worldly success, it collapses. And the text says its destruction was complete.
So how do you know what kind of house someone is building? Because on a sunny day, they probably look identical from the outside.
The text says you know a tree by its fruit. You don't get figs from thorn bushes. Your words don't matter if your character. The fruit is bad. So if you want to know what someone really believes,
Don't just listen to their speeches.
look at their fruit. Look at how they treat the people they have power over. Look at their integrity when they think no one is watching.
Okay, let's try and wrap this all up. We've covered a ton of ground here.
We have. We've basically outlined a worldview that is, well, it's radically invasive.
Yeah. It claims your thoughts are just as loud as your actions. It claims real power looks like what the world calls weakness, turning the cheek, going the extra mile.
And it argues the end goal isn't just to be a nicer person.
No, it's a complete reconstruction of the human heart, being born again, because our default settings, according to this text, lead to a total system crash.
It draws a very sharp line in the sand. You're either building on rock or you're building on sand. You're either stepping into the light to be seen or you're hiding in the darkness.
There's no neutral territory. It's intense. It really forces you to look in the mirror and ask, which code am I actually running on?
Which brings me to one last thought I'd like to leave you with. The text posits that darkness isn't just an empty space where light isn't. It's a place people choose to hide.
Right. People love darkness. An active choice.
So here's the question. If this ancient, all-seeing perspective is true, is our modern obsession with privacy, our desire to encrypt our messages, hide our search histories, keep our inner thoughts locked away from everyone, including the divine, is that actually a defense mechanism against moral exposure? Are we really just protecting our freedom, or are we just protecting our planks?
That is definitely something to chew on. Are we hiding because we're free, or because we're afraid of what the light might show? Thank you for listening. This has been Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll see you in the next deep dive.